What I have here is a couple of eccentrics that I made for my CNC table sliders, the XY sliders on there. Started out with a piece of 3/4 hex bought from Speedy Metals, and then I machined them so that the bearing would fit on them, and you can see that it is off-centered or eccentric. A hole in the bottom, I put a bolt in here, mounted on something, put a bolt in there, and by loosening the bolt and then adjusting it, tighten it back down again, I can make the bearing move in and out and apply pressure to whatever I'm trying to guide. Did the same thing, only this is a V pulley or a V bearing, again with the concentric, and this is 5/8 of an inch rod or hex. So anyway, I'm not a professional machinist. I do this as a hobby. I'll show you how I did it. It does not necessarily mean it is the best way or the only way. To make cutting these bearing adjusters a little easier, I made a carriage stop for my lathe, and it bolts in here with the steady follower bolted into, and then I had to take the cross feed off or cross carriage off and drill and tap it for these other two bolts. And what I did was I adjusted it so when it comes hard against that stop, that's the maximum in I want the carriage to do, and that's the diameter of the bearing that I'm cutting. I also made this had this larger tool holder, and it was too big to put in my quick change, so I made a holder for it. It's just a piece of flat 3/8, and then the little carriage thing underneath here that clamps down and got two bolts holding it in place. So it's very rigid, and it helps when I'm trying to cut the bearings, because I can just do them real quickly and stop right where I need to. Okay, I've got the 3/4 inch hex shaft in the vise in the chuck. I'm going to start with the center drill to drill a hole in the center. Then I'll follow up with a number 3 bit that is for I'm using 1/4 28 thread, so that is the bit that fits if you want to tap 1/4 28, and then I'll finish it up with tapping it. So I back my tailstock up to 1/2 inch, and I'm going to drill out to 1 inch deep hole. Stop here. I put a little bit of oil in the hole that I just drilled, a little on the tap, and all I'm doing is using this live center as a steady for the back end of the tap wrench. I don't apply a lot of pressure to it. It's just really to advance to keep up with the tap as it's going in to the hex. I found when the bits, the taps are nice and sharp, they turn real easy. If they start to get dull, it'll start to, the chuck will start turning when you're doing this action here. So after I get it down, I'm not trying to go all the way to the bottom of the hole, I'm just trying to get down to where the tap is good and started, so when I finish it later on in the vise, it's going to have, the tap is going to be nice and straight. Now I'm going to set the hex rod up in here. I've got a small piece of 1/8 inch flat stock, and what I do is I just loosen it up, slide this in under one of the teeth, and clamp it back down. This is going to give you the offset so that when you cut it, you'll true up the bearing mount, but the hex part of it will be off-center like this is here. There's two different ones that I've done. This is a 5/8 hex, this is 3/4 hex, and you can see how much is cut off on one side versus on the other side. I cut it approximately to the thickness of my bearing. Notice that the chips are kind of short. That's because you're only partially cutting the 360 degree because the hex shaft is off-centered. As you get closer and closer to the center, the chips are going to become longer and longer until the fact that you're doing a full turn on it. I have my stop set up so that I just keep cutting away, and eventually I run into the carriage stop and it tells me I've reached the diameter that I want. You can see that's a lot longer chip now, or really not a chip, but a long piece of swath. When you're doing your final cut, you run it up against the stop there. Come in and do a slow feed. Give it a nice smooth finish. And check the fit. Nice and snug. Then you just remove it and start over with another new one. I do 4 of these at a time. I have 2 shafts and I just cut off each end of the shaft, cut them off, and then start the next group. After I cut the hex shaft to the length that I want, then I take it over to a vise and chuck the bearing adjuster in and finish tapping it. These 3 fluted taps, gun taps, they push the metal that they're cutting out in front of it rather than carrying it along with them, and it makes it a lot easier because you can just continue tapping, and as you can see, the cuttings are coming out of the end of it and the tap's going in the other end. After I got finished cutting them off and running a tap through all the way through the bearing adjuster, I want to face it off so it has a nice flat surface to sit on when I bolted it in place. So just come in here and face it off, and then also put a little chamfer on it, and it ends up with a real nice flat surface when it's bolted down that holds the bearing true. That's about the end of it.